Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel. As preppers, we face a lot of different threats. We could run out of supplies, we could get sick or injured, and then also there's threats from the outside. And we can be affected by every single one of those within our own home, but if we were to try to bug out, then the chances of those and other mess happening would increase dramatically. Historically, this has been one of the most overglorified aspects of preparedness. Now, to be fair, this has gone down a little bit over the years, but it's still common with newer preppers or desk workers who are desperate to be some sort of mountain man. And while bugging out temporarily is smart during short-term events like hurricanes and could be your best option in some long-term situations, there's plenty of reasons to avoid bugging out, especially if you plan to do so over a long distance. My family and I just got back from a 4,400-mile road trip. We traveled through 10 states, visited 2 national parks, and I was also a groomsman at a wedding. But in addition to being a nice getaway for me and my family, it also taught me some valuable lessons about bugging out and the things that could go wrong. One of the most immediate concerns if you're trying to bug out is traffic. If a lot of people are trying to get out of somewhere at the same time, then naturally roadways will get overwhelmed. Now, believe it or not, over that entire 4,400-mile road trip, we actually didn't experience all that much traffic. The only instance of that we really dealt with was once we got back into Texas. We were trying to get through Dallas, and there was construction, and we were pretty close to the afternoon rush. But keep in mind that the traffic we experienced was on a completely normal day. Nothing was wrong. The amount of people on the road wasn't any higher than normal, and they weren't panicked because there was something horrible headed their way. However, if there was a legitimate situation happening, then things would have been exponentially worse. So if you live in a major metropolitan area, do everything that you can to make sure that you and your loved ones are some of the first ones out. Keep an eye on current events, including the weather, so nothing catches you off guard. Another thing that could get preppers killed while they're trying to bug out is running out of gas. Over the course of our trip, we stopped at least 21 times to get gas. To be fair, some of those were just to top off, but you do need to ask yourself, are you going to be able to make it to your destination with the fuel in your tank? And if you're planning to bring extra fuel with you, are you going to have enough room for that and everything else that you want to take with you? Then your vehicle's fuel economy is another thing you should consider, and that's actually my biggest gripe about my truck. It only got around 23 miles per gallon at its absolute best, going 65 miles an hour on the most boring and flat terrain imaginable. I think the Gladiator made the list of vehicles with the worst fuel economy, so yay for that, and to be honest, the way I drive doesn't help things either. Another thing that could get preppers killed when trying to bug out is vehicle problems. Even simple things like a dead battery or a flat tire could be disastrous if you're not prepared to deal with them. Before we left, I made sure to go ahead and get my oil changed, and I also swapped out my engine and cabin air filters. I also like to keep a battery jump pack and a pair of jumper cables in my truck. The battery jump pack is my first option since I don't have to find someone to help jump me off, but the jumper cables are a good backup in case the jump pack doesn't work for one reason or another. It'll probably be a lot easier to find somebody that's willing to help rather than somebody who's willing to help and happens to have a pair of jumper cables. Another thing I took with us was a cordless impact driver and an impact socket for the lug nuts on my truck. And I know that an impact wrench is the right tool for that job. They're a little more powerful, but in a pinch, as long as you have the right adapter, you can use an impact driver as well. And the main purpose of that was just to, first of all, get the tire changed out as quickly as possible because I didn't, want to be beside the interstate and some moron come and wipe me and my family out. And then also, in case there was a stubborn lug nut, that would just give a little bit more juice to get that off. Then if you think you may need to go off-road, be sure to have recovery gear like traction boards, a winch, and recovery straps. The next thing that could get you killed when you're trying to bug out is bad weather. During our trip, we experienced a lot of different conditions. As we traveled through Texas and the eastern half of New Mexico, it was fairly sunny at around 50 or 60 degrees. Then as we got closer to Albuquerque, the temperature dropped to around freezing with snow sticking to the ground next to the interstate. Day 2 was similar in that we had nice sunny conditions as we traveled through the rest of New Mexico and most of Arizona, and then we hit snow in Flagstaff, and then it cleared up with sunny skies the rest of the way to the Grand Canyon. That night it started to sleet and snow, but thankfully we already had our tent set up and we had a buddy heater, so it wasn't nearly as miserable as it could have been with a 4-year-old who's not used to that sort of thing. Then on the way home we had heavy snow, which was really fun for this Texas boy who's not used to that kind of nonsense. It was covering the interstate through eastern Idaho and western Montana. Then we had snow and ice in Wyoming, which literally stalked us through the northern half of Colorado as well. And what's interesting about a lot of that is that it was not forecast. Our first night in the Grand Canyon, we were only supposed to get light rain, and that's not what happened at all. And then, when we spent the night in Casper, Wyoming, we weren't supposed to get any snow that night, and you can see what everything looked like the next morning. Now, fortunately, it wasn't as bad as it could have been, and our vehicle did handle it like a champ. We didn't even have to use four-wheel drive except for maybe once, and that was very brief. But it was a very good demonstration of how unpredictable weather can be. And it's entirely possible that it could take a turn for the worse while you're heading out of town. One good way that you can prepare for bad weather is to know alternate routes. We had to do this as we were traveling through Colorado because we found out the interstate was shut down right at the Kansas state line. So we kind of avoided that, went through the Oklahoma Panhandle, spent the night in Amarillo where the weather was a lot better. Then knowing alternate routes is also useful if your primary one is bogged down for other reasons, like traffic jams or damage to the roadway. But there is a chance that if you're bugging out, you may not be able to access things like forecasts and weather maps. Various situations can knock out cell towers, meaning you won't be able to use the weather maps on your phone. If that were to happen, radio would be your best option, but even if we still have that, it's not going to be nearly as detailed as what we're used to, which will make it a little harder to plan for those weather events and avoid them. Unfortunately, people get stranded in heavy snow on roadways every year, and some of them don't make it out. Having things like winter clothing, blankets, and an emergency candle in your vehicle can help with this. Then in the summer months, be sure to have plenty of water with you to prevent dehydration. Several years ago, I was traveling with my grandparents. It was in, I believe, the middle of August. Big traffic jam, and then their vehicle died. And we were just kind of stranded out there. I mean, I was fine. I was pretty young back then. My brother was fine. But, my grandparents, they were, I believe, probably in their late 60s or 70s when this happened. And that's a really bad position to be in. Also have a way that you can take shelter outside of your vehicle in case you can't stay in there for one reason or another. Another thing that'll get preppers killed when trying to bug out is picking an alternate location that's too far from their home. While you do want wherever you're going to be far away from whatever you're getting away from, traveling longer distances will open you up to unexpected situations, including some of the things that we've already talked about. The longer you need to travel, the greater your chances of getting stuck in traffic or hit by bad weather. And when it comes to traffic jams, keep in mind that the longer you're on the road, that'll give more people a chance to figure out that something bad is going on. Even though you may have gotten through your hometown without any issues, you're probably still going to have to pass through other communities as you're traveling, and you'll have to deal with whatever panic or disorders going on there. Then, as you're stuck, your gas mileage will go completely down the pooper, which means that your fuel reserves may not get you where you need to go. It also increases the chances of your vehicle breaking down or needing repair. So what I'd recommend is try to find the happy median between getting far enough away from whatever it is, but also not so far away that you open yourself up to unnecessary risk. And given all this will depend on your own personal situation and other factors, but I'd caution against trying to travel further than what a tank of gas plus an additional 5-gallon gas can will be able to take you. The next thing that'll cause huge problems for preppers when bugging out is taking too much stuff or taking the wrong stuff. And I'll admit I'm probably the world's worst about wanting to take everything, including the kitchen sink, with me everywhere I go. Before we left, I had a list of everything that I wanted to take, and I picked up some new waterproof plastic totes to keep stuff in the back because my wonderful new tonneau cover is not waterproof, and I thought I knew where we were going to put everything. Well, as you can probably guess, that's not how things happened. While I was concerned more with the camping side of things and also having what we would need to survive if the doodle hit the poodle 2,000 miles away from home, my wife was thinking about the needs of our 4-year-old son, which were also pretty important. She was thinking about what he'd need to stay occupied and not bugging us to death, and also homeschool activities he could do while we were on the road. And when you're packing for a 10-day road trip with a camp out, a wedding, and a mini pre-K rolled up into it, that's a lot of stuff to cram into a Jeep Gladiator, even if it does have a non-waterproof tonneau cover. So we ended up having to leave some things behind. There was no way one of our new plastic totes was going to fit in the back, and we also had to leave our 12-volt fridge and some other things behind that I really wish that we could have taken with us. And the best way to deal with this is to just plan ahead of time. Figure out exactly what you're going to take with you and practice loading it before you're in the middle of a real situation. And another thing you need to do is a much better job than I did communicating with your spouse to make sure that all of the different needs, including ones that you might not think of, are taken care of. Now, when determining which survival gear to bring, focus on preps that don't take up a lot of space and can be used long term. Maybe rather than bringing a propane stove or a full-size rocket stove, instead load up something like this Solo Stove Lite. It won't take up a lot of space and it can run on natural materials. Another mistake that preppers make when bugging out is picking the wrong vehicle, and like other things, the right one will depend on your particular situation. I still think that the Gladiator is a good choice for my needs, but it does have some drawbacks. Like I mentioned earlier, the gas mileage is absolutely horrendous and the storage space is limited, so for some folks it might make more sense to get a truck or SUV with a little better gas mileage and also more storage space. And that's especially true if you're probably not going to have to do a whole lot of off-roading, but of course, you can get those in four-wheel drive as well. And rather than going out and trying to buy the perfect bug-out vehicle, a better strategy is to just understand your vehicle's limitations and plan your bug-out around those. Like me, I'm not going to sell my Jeep because the gas mileage stinks and it can't haul as much as a U-Haul. It's just too much fun for that. So instead, I'm going to make sure I always have a little bit of fuel stored at my house at all times, because really, we don't have that far to bug out anyway. And then also I'm just going to be a little smarter about what I plan to bring with us. And also stay on top of regular maintenance to reduce the chances of it breaking down. Like if your car sounds like the front door to a creepy haunted house every time that you back down the driveway, you probably want to get that checked out. Then another thing that could get preppers killed during a bug out is the human factor, and when I say this, most people will probably start thinking of outside threats, things like roadblocks or criminals. And of course, since we were just on a family road trip, not during the apocalypse, we didn't have a whole lot of that, like we didn't see any mutants, zombies, or cannibals, at least that I'm aware of, but we did run into a couple of minor issues. There were a couple panhandlers, only one got aggressive and I just drove away from him, and then also there was some road rage guy in Montana. But one thing that we overlook is that some threats will come from within your group itself. Bugging out is going to be incredibly stressful for everyone involved. Adults are going to be worried about getting everybody to safety, while kids and even teenagers are going to be preoccupied by the fact that their entire life just got turned upside down. So the best way to deal with that mental aspect is to just normalize the process of bugging out as much as possible. Like, do what we did. Go on road trips and pack everything you need to take with you for the real thing. That'll give you practice loading everything up and then also experience being crammed in a vehicle for long periods of time. And also, explain to your kids why you may need to bug out, why that's important, and also what would be expected of them in that sort of situation. And be honest, especially with your older kids. For the little ones, give them the info that they need in a way that they can process and try to keep them distracted from the more stressful aspects of the situation. And be sure to leave room for games or other activities that everyone can use to stay occupied. Then also plan other aspects of your bug out ahead of time, especially things like what would cause you to need to bug out, or at the very least start loading up your supplies, because if the world's falling apart around you, you don't want to be doing too much critical thinking because, well, you're going to be compromised. So Work that out now while things are relatively normal, and that way you can kind of fall back on those good decisions and also training you have done, because you really don't want to be arguing with your spouse about whether you should stay or go while the world is on fire. And even though bugging out has a lot of risks, it may be necessary in certain situations. If you want to learn more about what you need to bug out the right way, then click here. Or if you want to see what you need to bug in, then click here. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.